We were aboard Olympic then, making the difficult turn by the Bramble, when the long, narrow lines of a Royal Navy vessel appeared, some 3 to 4 miles away, coming up from the Needles. Moving fast, but we were already committed, with Calshot's spit on our starboard quarter, and Egypt Point by Cowes dead ahead and looming. Now that snake-like channel around the Bramble Bank is not a place to hesitate. Not with a fully laden ship of 45,000 tons. She was about a point on the port bow when I first saw her. I mentioned it to George, but neither of us anticipated a problem. She was clearly overtaking and bound to keep out of our way. With 2 short blasts on the hooter, we signalled our intention to turn to port around the West Bramble buoy. "Stop port engine!" As the 4th officer rang the telegraph, George called, "Half astern port engine!" A moment later adding, "Full astern port!" to facilitate the manoeuvre. He ordered the quartermaster to put the helm hard over. It was 12:40. With us on the bridge, the 6th officer was noting times and orders for the deck log. Our starboard engine was still on full speed, but owing to the pull of the turn, we slowed considerably as we came round. Within 3 or 4 minutes, we'd steadied on our course, south 59 degrees east, to South Ryde. With the port engine once more on full ahead, I looked back to see that our pursuer was a small, twin-funnelled cruiser. Now on the starboard quarter, about half a mile away, she was clearly drawing up fast, well, no doubt on her way to Portsmouth. I expected she would alter to port and cross astern of us. I turned forward to check we were running true. But Olympic steers well, and we were. To starboard, as I turned my head, I could see right down Cowes Harbour. Moments later, I looked back again, and to my astonishment, the cruiser was still with us, and catching up, running parallel to our course, and turning the foam at a rate of knots. What was she trying to do? Was her commander showing off before my array of passengers, cutting a dash just to prove he could? He was more than a cable's distance off, maybe 300 yards. Still safe, but with the deep water channel shelving up ahead as it ran towards the shore, I thought he was running a risk. But the cruiser was small, with a much shallower draft, and she came up so quick I thought she was bound to get past. George agreed. Unconcerned, he went to look over the port side. And suddenly, for no discernible reason, the cruiser dropped back, and as she lost way, began to turn in. And when a great wall of spray leapt up along her port side, and I shouted to George, "She's coming to port!" And I couldn't believe it. It was utter madness. "I don't think she'll clear our stern." He ordered his helm hard over, but I knew it was too late. The cruiser was coming in at an amazing rate, almost right angles. I could see her bridge, her starboard guns, her name, Hawk, on the starboard quarter. Sailors rushing to the side. She'll never make it, I thought, in that long, long moment of certainty. I caught sight of Murdoch dashing back to the poop. Had she cleared? No. As she struck our starboard quarter, I felt the impact like an explosion. For one crazy moment, I thought she'd fired on us. I raced in, pulled the emergency lever to shut the watertight doors. In a cloud of dust and rust, Hawk almost turned turtle as she backed off. The rending of steel like a screech of 1,000 gulls. But she righted herself. That pugnacious prow of hers, a mangled, crumpled mess. I couldn't see the damage to my vessel, but from the look of the cruiser, I knew it had to be bad. I mean, I could feel it in the dipping of the stern. And she'd knocked us askew. By the time we stopped, we were looking at Ryde. The junior was still scribbling. The time of the impact, he told me later, was 12:46. Shock manifests itself in strange ways. For as long as it took, and it took a considerable time, I was perfectly calm. Spoke to the chief in the engine room, received assurances that no one below was injured, that the damage below was confined to 2 compartments. The pumps were working, and he was trying to assess the damage. Our passengers appeared to be safe, and other than the spectators on the deck, most were busy enjoying lunch, thank God, and wondering why the ship had stopped. With Hawke's prow penetrating just below the saloon deck and cutting through 3 decks of second and third class passengers, there might have been some serious injuries. We hailed the cruiser. No injuries there. In the subsequent exchange of messages, I asked Commander Blunt for an explanation. See, it's a perfectly civil question. I mean, it's never a good idea to get into an argument, particularly when inquiry is about to follow. He replied that I was going too fast, and that his helm had jammed. I sent back that he would be hearing from my owners. Once I had spoken to my senior officers and dictated some announcements, I went to find George. He was still out on the bridge watching the performance going on aboard the cruiser. Dozens of seamen were all over her like ants, trying to secure collision mats to make her seaworthy. What the bloody hell was he doing? He said his helm jammed. What? Oh, rubbish! George followed me into the wheelhouse. Lost his nerve, more like. Thought he was running out of sea room, the silly bugger, and tried to get round our stern. He didn't make a very good job of it, did he? He should have crossed when he had the chance. Why didn't he? Bloody amateurs. Put him in charge of a bloody gunboat and... oh, they think they know it all. Oh, yeah, lunch waiting up in Pompey, I shouldn't wonder. George was livid. I was cold, calculating tasks yet to perform. As my steward came to say he'd made coffee, I offered George some lunch in the mess and retired to my office to write announcements of our position and inability to proceed. First, a telegraph to White Star's office in Southampton, one to Trinity House and another to the Board of Trade, also the harbour master in Southampton. And a message to the man at Cowes, because we'd need his assistance in getting my ship to a place of safety and in getting the passengers off. There was also a question of salvage, but that could wait. White Star would probably negotiate terms with the towage company. With Hawke standing by, we anchored in Osborne Bay. Then, as she left for Portsmouth, oh, and a sight she was too, like a boxer with a burst nose. We turned and proceeded to King's Yacht's moorings at Cowes. Aboard Olympic, the pursers and stewards were kept busy, dealing with varying levels of anxiety and disgruntlement. We got our passengers off in the early evening by tender to Cowes, whence they were conveyed to Southampton. And although I could sympathise, how they were to continue their journeys was none of my responsibility. That, fortunately, was White Star's. My concerns were more immediate. Bob Fleming was the chief engineer that voyage. With Chief Officer Henry Wilde, we went down in a boat to look up at the torn and buckled plates in a hole some 30 feet high. What we saw was a terrible wound. Well, I'd felt the collision. I'd been down in the engine room to see the damage, but viewing it from seawards was a far worse shock. It was like knowing you've injured yourself, feeling the sting of it, but not actually understanding the pain until you wash away the blood and see the flesh gaping to either side. Our 5th voyage, that's all. It was heartbreaking. To my mind, serious repairs always affect a ship. She's never quite the same again. And the wound before us was, well, superficial compared to the damage we suspected below the waterline. It'll be a Belfast job, sir, Bob Fleming said, outlining his estimation of damage to the starboard propeller and shaft. Southampton can't take us. The dry dock's too small. Expensive, I commented, and time-consuming. They'll have to find us a new prop shaft, I'm thinking. Shaft of late afternoon light cut through the water beside the boat. I looked down, trying to see where Hawke's ram had broken off on penetration was still embedded in the engine room. Fleming saw it first. As he pointed, I could just make out the device, like some huge, obscene penis wedged into Olympic's most vulnerable parts. Gazing at it, the chief muttered with bitter feeling. Sorry, sir, I gotta say it. I feel like I've been well and truly fucked. His words broke the tension, prompting barks of laughter, however brief. Never a truer word, Chief. I hope they strip his bloody rings off. Wilde had the commander emasculated, reduced to galley boy, and damned to hell besides. Oh, they'll have an inquiry, I prophesied gloomily, and probably promote him. As it transpired, that is precisely what happened. But that was later. Much later. The nadir of my winter, which at that point had yet to begin. The thought of it, even now, drove the image of that ram right into my vitals.